Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Alley, and I'm undertaking a master's degree by distant learning at the University of Huddersfield. I have a rib tumour, so if I pause for breath to catch my breath, please bear with me, as this is part of my condition. My MA in history focuses on the topic how the female victims of Jack the Ripper have been represented in popular culture in the 20th century. Today I will be discussing the intriguing and controversial theory known as Jill the Ripper. This theory proposes that challenges the traditional narrative about Jack the Ripper by proposing an alternate suspect and story. Now, traditional narratives, as advocated by well-known Ripperologists such as Paul Begg, Donald Rumbelow, and Philip Sugden, argue that the Ripper was a man and that he murdered at least 5 women between April the 4th and November the 9th, 1888. These victims were known as the Canonical Five, and were Mary Ann Nicholas, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly, and they were all killed late at night and in the early hours of the morning. Because of my health, this presentation will be brief and will focus on 2 main points. 1, the origins of Jill the Ripper theory, and 2, the strengths and weaknesses of this theory. Now, the origins of the Jill the Ripper theory originates from the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the last of the Canonical Five victims, who was killed on November the 9th, 1888. Kelly was killed at 13 Miller's Court, where she had a room. After her murder, a woman named Caroline Maxwell, who lived and worked in the area, came forward with a significant witness account. Mrs. Maxwell testified that she saw Mary Kelly twice on the morning she was murdered. The first sighting, she said, was between 8 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. in front of Miller's Court, and Kelly appeared quite ill. Mrs. Maxwell was sure of the time because her husband returned from work around 8 o'clock each morning. The second sighting, she said, was an hour later, when she said she saw Kelly speaking with a man outside the Britannia public house. Mrs. Maxwell described the clothes she saw on the woman she believed to be Kelly that morning, stating that she had a dark shirt, velvet bodice, and a maroon-coloured shawl. When asked if she'd ever seen Kelly wearing this outfit, she replied that she definitely remembered Kelly wearing the shawl. The testimony perplexed Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline, who was leading the investigation into the Ripper murders at the time, because medical evidence had established that Mary Kelly's time of death was between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, based on factors such as body temperature and joint stiffness. Furthermore, the majority of witnesses, including George Hutchinson, an unemployed labourer, testified that they saw Mary Ann Kelly with a man with dark hair and moustache walking into Miller's Court around 2:45 a.m. This suggested that she was alive and with a man close to the estimate time of her death. Aberline, however, at least in Aberline's mind, had no reason to distrust Mrs. Maxwell, and she continued to adamantly adhere to the times and descriptions she had given. This discrepancy puzzled Aberline, and he later approached Dr. Thomas Dutton with a question: do you think it could be a case not of Jack the Ripper, but Jill the Ripper? Aberline's hypothesis was based on the possibility that the killer dressed up in Kelly's clothes to disguise herself, which could explain Miss Maxwell's sighting of her the next day. That was the origin of the Jill the Ripper theory. Now for the reactions. Aberline's theory was never pursued further, partly because his superiors believed the Ripper was a man, and partly because Mary Jane Kelly was regarded as the last of the Jack the Ripper victims. As a result, as days, weeks, and months went by, the police focus and resources shifted to other crimes, and the question of whether the Ripper was a woman or a man was never definitively answered, particularly as the killer was never caught. Now, Victorian writers did not pursue Abilene's theory, with the exception of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame. He looked into it and concluded that while Jack the Ripper was unlikely to be a woman, it's possible that he murdered Mary Kelly. That after he murdered Mary Kelly, he put on her dress and made his escape disguised as a woman. This, he argued, is why witnesses came forward after the time Mary Kelly was believed to have been killed and said they saw her. Incredibly, despite all the books on Jack the Ripper that appeared over the following 50 years after the Ripper murders, not one explored the Jill the Ripper theory in any meaningful detail, and most of them ignored it altogether. Indeed, it wasn't until 1939 when William Stewart, in his book Jack the Ripper, A New Theory, explored the theory in any meaningful detail. In it, Stewart asked for what I consider really good questions. 1. What sort of person was it that could move about at night without arousing the suspicions of his own household or of other people that he might have met? 2. Who could walk through the streets in blood-stained clothing without arousing too much comment? 3. Who would have had the medical knowledge and skill to have committed the mutilations? And 4. Who could have been found by the body and yet have given a satisfactory alibi for being there? Stewart concluded that the killer may have been a midwife, possibly an abortionist. He argued that not only would a midwife be able to move about at night without arousing the suspicions of her own household or of other people that she might have met, because midwives were often up in the early hours attending to their patients, but she would also have had the medical knowledge and skill to commit the mutilations. Moreover, he argued, a midwife could have been found by the body and yet given a satisfactory alibi for being there, and the midwife could also walk through the streets in blood-stained clothing without arousing too much comment, given she was present at births and carried out various medical procedures. As for motive, William Stewart argued that she might have been betrayed by a married woman with whom she had tried to help with an abortion and sent to prison. As a result, she began killing women as a way of revenging herself on her own sex. Sounds a bit dicey to me, but Stewart put forward some interesting arguments to back up his claim. 1. He argued that it was common for midwives to knock out their patients by exerting pressure on the pressure points. This was interesting because none of the Ripper victims appear to have put up much resistance or cried out before they were killed, and a number of victims, including Annie Chapman, showed signs of having pressure points applied to her neck here and here before they were killed. 2. Stewart argued that Mary Kelly was 3 months pregnant at the time of her death and could barely afford her lodgings, let alone baby. So according to Stewart, Kelly decided to terminate her pregnancy. He claims that Kelly called on the service of Jill the Ripper to abort the baby, and Jill the Ripper killed Kelly once she was admitted into a room, later burning her blood-soaked clothing in the gate and escaping wearing Kelly's clothing. Similar to what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle argued. Now, this is important because according to Stewart, it explains why Mrs. Maxwell said she saw Mary Kelly at 8 a.m. the next morning, or rather explains why she said she saw Mary Kelly at 8 a.m. the next morning. According to Stewart, what she really saw was Jill the Ripper wearing Mary Kelly's clothes. Stewart also cites a chief suspect in all of this, which is Mary Peasley, who in October 1890 stabbed her lover's wife and child to death and cut their throats, later wheeling the bodies into a secluded street. Stewart claimed there were two striking similarities between those murders and the Ripper murders. First, the savage throat cutting. All the Jack the Ripper victims had their throats cut, with the possible exception of Mary Kelly, whose body was so cut up. It was never established entirely if she had her throat cut first. And second, the modus operation of killing in private and then dumping the body in public place, Stewart argued, fitted in with the modus operation of Jack the Ripper murders. He pointed out that Andy Chapman had been killed one place and possibly moved, and so had Pollyann Nicholas into the street in the latter case. Her body was dumped in the street after she'd been killed. So what do I think? Well, to begin with, there is no evidence to dispute Stewart's evidence that Jack the Ripper was in fact a woman who made a living in midwife, and in fact most of what he says is valid. It's true a midwife would have the medical knowledge to carry out the mutilations, and it's true a midwife could walk the streets with blood on her clothes without attracting undue attention. However, there are also flaws to his theory. For example, there is no evidence Mary Kelly was pregnant at the time of her death. Moreover, Mary Pearsley killed people who could be linked to her and to whom it was known she bore a grudge. Unlike the Ripper, where no such link between the Ripper and the canonical five was established, and no such link has been properly established to this day. A third difference, however, it's an interesting one, this is Mary Pearsley killed a child, where all the Ripper victims were adults, and with the exception of Mary Kelly, who was in her 20s, the rest of the victims were middle-aged in their 40s. In my opinion, however, the Ripper was a man. I base this on the evidence provided by George Hutchinson earlier, who testified that he saw Mary Kelly with a man walking into Miller's Court around 2:45, and this man had black hair and a moustache, which aligns more closely with the known time of death provided by the medical evidence. It also aligns with the description of a man with dark hair and a moustache seen talking to other Ripper victims before their deaths. I believe the man George Hutchinson saw Mary Kelly going into Miller's Court with was Jack the Ripper. I will discuss this more in a future video. Thank you for listening.